Well, good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this impromptu special live stream. I thought since our party election broadcasts are being broadcast on BBC and STV within the next half an hour or so, I thought maybe there'll be a few people coming along to our social media, our Facebook page, Twitter, YouTube, just to have a look up to see what we're all about, having seen us on the television. So I thought, what better than to find someone to talk to when they got here. So I thought I'd go live for half an hour. Then people who do come exploring on social media, well, they can ask a question they've got straight away. Let's just get the comments up, and they can hear a bit more about what we're all about. So thanks to those who are joining already. Do make comments, do ask questions. That's what I'm relying on for this. I haven't really prepared anything for it, so hopefully we'll have some people joining us. But let's just see how it goes. Right, so 1824. So I think 1 minute until our party election broadcast starts on STV, and then I think it's 5 to 7 that it starts on BBC. So maybe some people will come and join or not. We shall see what we shall see. Right, Bruce, what does your party intend to change at the council level? Well, that's a great question. Thank you very much. I will start off with that one. We've divided our policies for the council election roughly into two sections. The first section is the sort of basics of running a council, where the priority is going to be listening to people's needs, listening to local people's needs, not being driven by the latest UN targets or a party agenda or anything else, listening to people's needs. I mean, the classic illustration of that, the thing that's really brought that home to a lot of people around Scotland during the lockdown, was when councils started just erecting bollards in the most bizarre places, creating ridiculous widened footpaths, cycle lanes, blocking roads, all sorts of things that were completely out of tune with what local people wanted. But the council did it because they thought it was the right thing to do, because it fit in with some wider agenda. So that was a classic case of councils being driven by something other than what the people they're supposed to be serving want. So that's the first part of our thing. So I focus on the services. I mean, in terms of services, and let's just mention bins, for example. I know in Stirling, the bin collections are fortnightly, which is terrible. So people are up in arms. I mean, the council is just not doing the basics of its job. Bins need collecting more frequently than that. So we want to focus on the basics. In bin collections in Edinburgh, my bins were collected today. I mean, the bin men, we really appreciate the work that they do. It's a very valuable service, and I'm sure they work very hard. But the food waste bins, generally you'll see a bin man take it and sort of hurl it at the ground as though he's determined to break it, as though he's on commission for the number of bins he could break per day. And then the householders line their bins up in a nice row in a convenient place. The refuse collectors come along, empty them into the truck, and then it's as though they deliberately, strategically position them to block as many drives as possible. I mean, it would only take literally a second or two extra to just do things carefully and leave things in a sensible place instead of blocking people's drives wherever possible. So those sort of things, if that was a business, you just wouldn't get away with that. That would soon be sorted out. But with the council, this sort of service seems to become the norm. So things need tightening up. I think there's a lot of complacency around that. I mean, COVID-19 as a universal excuse for bad services, I mean, those days need to be over. I know that you get that with businesses, but you also get it with council services as well. I mean, it really does seem like it's been used as an excuse, as a reason to make the life easier for the council and a bit harder for the council tax payers. I mean, just an example for that is the recycling centres in Edinburgh. They introduced a booking system during the pandemic. I'm not sure how necessary that was, but anyway, that's what they did. They introduced a booking system, and they've now decided to keep it, which I find is a bit of a pain, really. You do a bit of work on a Saturday afternoon, and you want to just load the stuff in the back of the car, take it to the recycling centre. Oh, you have to book, don't you? Go online. Can you book? No slots till Monday. I mean, I would rather think, okay, Saturday afternoon, it's probably going to be busy. I might have to queue for a while. I don't mind. I'll just go and do it. I'd rather do it now than wait until Monday. But now that's gone. So again, it's probably much more convenient and pleasant for the council workers, not so great for the council tax payers, which is just one example of many. In terms of housing, I think seems to be a huge amount of housing being built around Edinburgh. I think it's the case in other parts of Scotland as well. Other parts of Scotland that have got the opposite problem. But the housing needs to be built in places where it's enhancing the neighbourhood, not where it's spoiling the environment, where it's enhancing a neighbourhood that needs more people in it, that needs, and it's got ground that needs developing. That's where houses should be going. So that's roughly sort of half of what we're focusing on. The ordinary run-of-the-mill council responsibilities, basically to make a better job of them and to be more responsive actually to local needs rather than other agendas. Then number two, the other half of our agenda is our focus on education. Education is a very major element in our policy platform, and councils have a significant amount of authority over schools. They have a significant amount of influence because the Scottish government sets policy. Often it's in the form of guidance. So if a council turns around to the government and says, well, thanks for your guidance, but we're not going to follow it. Well, that hasn't actually been tested in any significant way. I know Western Isles rejected the sex education resources, but more generally, that hasn't really been tested. But we think it needs to be tested because schools have got a really difficult job. They've got the task of trying to run a good school to provide a positive educational experience. That's one objective. They've also got the objective of following the latest instructions from the government through Education Scotland, ticking all the boxes for the inspectors. Now, those two goals are totally unrelated to each other. In fact, they're often in tension with each other. The goal of trying to run a good school is in tension with the goal of trying to keep the inspectors happy. And sadly, if you don't keep the inspectors happy, if you don't do what Education Scotland wants, then you get bad inspection reports. The head teacher will be out of a job, and the school will be in big trouble. So the focus has shifted towards get a good inspection report rather than run a good school. But within a council, that could be reversed to a significant degree. I mean, one particular area of guidance we've looked at has been the transgender guidance for schools. We think councils should just say to the government, thanks for your guidance, but we think it's utterly appalling, and we put it in the bin. We're going to ignore it completely, and we'll issue our own guidance for dealing with that. And our own guidance would not include things like keep gender changes secret from parents, if that's what young people want. So we'll have big changes with education. Similarly, the policy of basically abolishing punishments in schools, we don't think that's a good idea. So we think councils should say, well, in our council area, we're happy for head teachers to still have systems of punishments within their school, if that's what they want to do. Now, there's an interesting question. For those of us who don't have an SFP candidate, how should we use our vote? Well, that's for me as the party leader, I certainly won't vote for any other party. My personal conviction, which you may or may not share, but my personal conviction is I won't vote for and thereby endorse a party that isn't pro-life. I think that's an issue of such gravity that I'm not willing to compromise on it. I'm not willing to overlook the fact that a party basically is in favor of killing unborn children because I think they're good at fixing the roads or whatever. So I would only consider voting for another party that was pro-life, not a candidate, a party that was pro-life. So in almost every constituency, that would mean not voting instead of the family party. If you didn't have that sort of principle stance for whatever reason, then you were looking for another party. Which one would I recommend? Well, that's a very difficult one. I would say the party I would least recommend, the parties that are furthest away from our values would be the Greens, who are very hardline and intolerant in a lot of their policies. And the other one I would say is particularly egregious would be the Lib Dems, the party of death. The Lib Dems have this sort of cuddly, middle-of-the-road, moderate image, but they're for assisted suicide and abortion for any reason up to full term, which is just horrific. So they would be the two parties I would say certainly avoid. But interesting question. Thank you, Daniel. Interesting picture. Right, all the housing is soul-crushing noddy boxes. I haven't heard that phrase before. Architecture is a very interesting topic. I think we've been through some decades in the not too distant past when architecture was really at its nadir. and they were churning out just properties that are going to breed problems, are very difficult to live in, very uninspiring, to say the least. I mean, my feeling is that a lot of houses built now, I mean, they might be quite modest, they might be quite compact, but some of them, a lot of them look quite pleasant. The neighborhoods that are created look quite positive, but everyone's experience of these things is different. They're not exactly full of character, a lot of large housing estates, but yeah, that's they are what they are, aren't they? Right. Who else? Welcome, Aurelius. It was good to have a Roman emperor join us. Was it an emperor? Emperor Aurelius? Yeah, I think so. Do you know what happened to the pupil Murray, who was expelled from Means Academy, Lawrence Kirk, in 2019 for saying there are only two genders? Now, I do actually know what happened to him. So this is the boy who was in a class, and the teacher was explaining. Well, Murray said to the teacher, Murray was about, I don't know, 16 or 17 years old. He said to the teacher, basically, I believe there's only two genders. And the teacher more or less said, you're not allowed to say that in this school. And Murray stuck to his guns. And the teacher became a bit more and more intimidating, saying, basically, you're not allowed to say that. You're breaking the rules more or less by saying that. So he stuck to his guns. And the teacher sent him out of class for saying there are two genders, which is beyond outrageous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But that's Scottish education for you. This is the tip of the iceberg. That's the case that unusually got filmed and became an internet sensation. This sort of thing will be repeated around Scotland multiple times per day. So what happened within the school is that Murray was disciplined, not for saying the wrong thing, but allegedly for filming the teacher. Normally, pupils are not allowed to film teachers. So he was technically breaking a rule there. So what happened is the school considered what to do. I understand that this was passed up and up the chain until eventually it went to Education Scotland. And the chief executive of Education Scotland made the decision that Murray should basically be expelled from school for it. So as I understand it, Murray was expelled from school and had to start again at a new school, allegedly for the crime of filming the teacher, which is nonsense. You don't get expelled for filming a teacher in Scotland. In Scotland, you don't get expelled for punching a teacher normally. So, I mean, obviously that's not the real reason. It's just what he'd said was so embarrassing. He'd created a situation that was so embarrassing for the school and for Education Scotland that they made him pay and moved him on. So that was the situation with Murray. That's a couple of years ago now. I'd be interested to hear his experiences now. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. What about independence for the Picts from the Gaelic SNP? Now, there's an interesting issue. I can see from your little picture there and your name, it's obviously an issue close to your heart. It's not something we've developed a policy on, to be honest. I mean, our personal opinion is there's no shortage of division in Scottish society already without bringing this extra one in. So if the Picts could just put that on the back burner for now, I think we'd probably all really appreciate that. But we really love your art and your cup and ring marks on stones. So thanks very much for that. Right, David, welcome. Interesting picture. A new face, I think. I'm not sure we've seen you on the live stream again. Welcome. Do put in any comments or questions. Right, just continuing with what I said about our policies for schools. I'll talk about discipline a little bit. Academic rigor is another thing that we want to bring back into education. The curriculum for excellence is vague and woolly, and it's about what experiences the pupils have primarily, rather than what they learn, what they can do, and how well they understand it. That sort of goes on the back burner a bit. It's more about what you've done and what you've enjoyed and how you're feeling about it and what sort of person you are. Which, those things have got a place in education, but they've run out of control in Scottish education at the expense of traditional academic teaching. So we want to redress the balance. What can a council do? And we're still saddled with a curriculum for excellence, but within that, councils could issue instructions to their schools to try and moderate the ill effects of the Scottish government's curriculum. Now, recently, the Scottish Conservative Party cut and pasted our policy about scrapping the curriculum for excellence and have made it their own. Since the Scottish Family Party was formed, our policy has been to scrap the curriculum for excellence for the reasons I've just outlined. The Conservative Party have supported the Curriculum for Excellence throughout its whole journey. Sorry about the light there. It's coming through the slots of my blind. Throughout its lifetime. They've voted for it. They've supported it. They might have criticized it here and there. They've basically been behind it, even though it was quite obviously a total disaster. But only at this stage, when one could say the Scottish Family Party has taken the lead on it, have the Conservative Party cut and pasted our policy and made it their own. I was a teacher, and I remember it would be a long time ago. It would probably be over 20 years ago. I went to some meeting where some of the people who were developing the Curriculum for Excellence were on a panel, and they were answering questions from teachers. And I remember sitting there thinking, these people on the panel, they're not up to the job. They don't know what they're talking about. They've got a very superficial understanding. They're very sentimental, and I've got no confidence in them at all producing a sound curriculum. That was over 20 years ago, probably. I was hearing that. And here we are to now, we're still saddled with it. So changing the curriculum is a very important thing as well. The other thing in schools is this obsession with well-being. So though the teachers have to be a cross between a social worker and a counsellor, mainly a counsellor. And the message to the young people is, how are you feeling today? Life's really tough, isn't it? How are you getting on? Do you need to see the counsellor? Let's talk about your feelings. What are you worried about? My favourite story, I think this was actually from England, but it could well have been from Scotland. A girl went home from primary school and said to her mum and dad, "Oh, I'm really worried. And they said, "What's the problem?" They said, "I can't do my homework." "What's your homework?" "We've got to write down something we're worried about to put in the worry box. And I'm not worried about anything." And that's what I say, they create problems out of nothing. Now, sometimes pupils experience, anxieties, traumas, sometimes to the point of mental health problems. Well, obviously they need support and care. But that's been universalized so that all aspects of daily life are looked at through the lens of well-being and mental health. And it creates the impression in young people that everything that comes along is expected to be a real trauma for them, a real ordeal for them. And I think it undermines resilience in young people. All right. Hello, Kevin. Can you explain the differences between being a nationalist and a patriot to your country? Well, let's start with a patriot. First of all, I think a patriot is someone who loves their country, are willing to make sacrifices for it, are committed to it, and are willing to involve themselves in action to build up and promote the interests of that country. So I'd say that is patriotism. So patriotism, as I've defined it there, I think is an entirely positive thing. Nationalism, again, these things can't really be precisely pinned down, but nationalism in some senses involves not just promotion of the national interest from a patriotic point of view, but it can verge into hostility towards other nations as well. So it's not just a desire for the best for your nation, but that becomes the best for your nation even at the expense of other nations, or especially at the expense of other nations. And nationalism also has the interpretation where you have a group of people who aren't currently a state, but wish to become a state, and then that's a nationalist movement. And that's what we've got in Scotland. So the SNP is a nationalist movement in that regard. Around the world, there are lots of other nationalist movements. Now, a lot of the trouble spots in the world are to do with nationalist movements, where things turn violent, turn very bitter. So it's where borders change, or one country wants to separate from another or recombine with another, as it historically used to be, like the situation we've got in the Ukraine. That's the way, that's the source of a lot of the world's tensions. So ultimately, there's a form of nationalism at the heart of it. That's not to say that the SNP is in any way a warmongering, but just that is the nature of nationalism around the world. That's not a question I've considered at great length, but that was what I thought off the top of my head. So do keep our questions and comments coming in. And the other things to do with schools, I'll just carry on with our manifesto. I was waiting for some more comments. Oh, here we go. SNP is not truly nationalist. It uses the term nationalist and waves the flag, but it's globalist. The SNP is an interesting phenomenon, and you're right, it isn't nationalist in the sense that in a conventional sense. For example, when I first came to Scotland, which would be 28 years ago or so, I remember quite a bit of Scottish nationalism was of the type, look how many inventors came from Scotland. Scotland's a really great country. Look at our history. Look at all the great people. Look at our great literature. Look at our great culture. We're really proud of being Scottish. We should be independent. That was quite a strong theme in it. Whereas now I feel that's completely gone. You don't hear really anything along those lines from Scottish nationalists, certainly not from the SNP. It's more our vision is to be a modern European nation. By European nation, they mean member of the EU, which is something, this is not a controversial thing to say, something that in some ways undermines nationhood because it involves handing over some of the responsibilities and authority that normally belong to a nation to a different body. So you're right, it's an unusual combination of viewpoints there. Now, Arlene, been sharing the party election broadcast, I hope. Right, thank you very much. All right, this party is full of Nazis. Right. Okay. I'd be interested to hear you to elaborate on that. About what gave it away? Is it our sort of genocidal policies? Is it our desire for world domination and tyranny? Sort of genocidal. Yeah. If you'd expand on that, I'd be fascinated because to be honest, it just sounds idiotic at the moment. But I'm sure you've got very good reasons. So if you'd like to put them forward, we'd be delighted to hear them. Also lost the fire in their bellies. Well, that's well, certainly the Scottish nationalist movement has changed. I'm not saying whether that's a good or bad thing. That's just an observation during my time in Scotland. What about reporting assaults in school to the police? Now, that's a very interesting question because quite a few schools in Scotland now have a police officer stationed on the campus, which to my mind is just an indication that discipline's broken down, and it's just an absolute disgrace that that's necessary. Another consequence is the police officer who's there probably goes around being softly and very gentle, and basically takes away what should be a proper sense of a little bit of fear of the police in young people. That's probably removed completely by the friendly neighborhood copper who's in the school that they'd probably have a laugh with and wind up a little bit or whatever. So reporting assaults in schools. Now, that's a bit of a grey area, isn't it? Because if you've got a couple of toddlers and one of them hits the other one, you're also not going to report that to the police as an assault. But as children get older, well, I think there can be cases where schools should be reporting assaults. Ideally, with a lot of these things, the schools should have systems in place to be able to deal with that perfectly adequately themselves. So if a pupil assaults another one in a vicious manner, then that could be the end of their career in that school. They're kicked out, they have to start again. So I think that's good for the school, because the school sees that if you do that, that's the end of the road. That's the standard. That's non-negotiable. If you behave like that, you're out of this school. I think that's good for the whole school community, and that will help instill positive discipline in the school. For the pupil who's been expelled, I think it's good for them, because they'll learn the lesson that if you lose control or if you lash out vindictively like that, then that's the end of your time in that establishment. So they'll learn that lesson. Then the next time they're thinking, right, I'm just going to smash him one, they might think, whoa, hang on. I did that last time. Didn't work out too well. So I'd hope schools could deal with that. But increasingly in Scotland, they can't deal with it because they're not allowed to expel pupils. They're not allowed to even punish them. And it's all got to be softly, nicely. So schools are often incapable of dealing with that. So if schools are passing things to the police because they've lost their own teeth and they're not capable of dealing with things that they should be able to deal with, then that's not ideal. But I think there are some things that go in on schools that are so serious that they should be reported to the police. Absolutely. That is what I would advise, and I think that's helpful. I can tell a little story. I used to be a housemaster in a boarding school. We had an incident where a boy had done something that would have been a significant crime. In any case, stolen some money. And so it was discussed in the school, and they said, we should let the police know. So they said, phone the police. The police said, bring him along to the police station. We'll give him a fright. And I thought, oh, great, that sounds good. Just what he needs. So I took him along to the police station, and this police officer came in and sat down with him and said, now, you do know you're not supposed to do that, don't you? And the boy said, yes, I know. You won't do it again, will you? Oh, no. That's good. Don't you forget, will you? Don't you do it again? Oh, okay. Then off we went. And I thought, we've been better off not going. Because basically, it's as though you've played the police card, but it didn't work. It was a blank. It was like firing a blank. Nothing really happened. So yeah, interesting question. If you've got some thoughts about it, I would be interested to hear them. Kevin? Right, David, what about bringing back the death penalty for horrendous crimes, i.e. serial killers? Scottish Family Party does not have a policy of bringing back the death penalty. I think in Britain, it's only relatively recently, within the last few years, that the majority opinion has tipped against the death penalty. I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Before then, the majority of people were in favour of it. I think there's a lot of arguments against it. But on the other hand, I mean, my personal view, nothing to do with family party policy, my personal view is that, well, for example, if you go to the cinema and you see a real baddie all the way through the film, he's done all sorts of terrible things, and at the end he gets killed by someone. Does anyone in the cinema thinks, oh, that was a bit harsh, I wish he hadn't been killed. That was a bit too much. He didn't deserve that. So I think our natural intuition does tend to think that some people act so badly that they do deserve to die. I do think that's our intuition. Whether or not that's best to be implemented through the criminal justice system currently in a society like ours, that's an open question. I could talk about that a little bit more, but I'll leave it there because it's not Scottish Family Party policy. Yeah, I'll be happy to chat about that in a pub somewhere, but we'll leave that for now. Right. Thank you, Sandy. Keep up the good work. We certainly will. What have we got here? Allowing parents to hit their children to just get away with it. Right. Okay. Right. Allowing parents to hit their children to just get away with it. I'm not quite sure what you're saying there. But our policy was, is that we oppose the smacking ban. We think parents should be free to smack children if that's what they want to do. Now, people always say, oh, so you're in favor of abusing children, of beating children. That's completely nonsense. I mean, like throughout history in Britain, throughout history in virtually every society, that's normal practice. Kids are naughty, young kids in particular, and sometimes they'd receive a smack, and that would be a really helpful way of teaching them and training them to behave better. Whereas now that's been taken away, what's the effect on children? Not just with the smacking ban, but the general undermining of the concept of punishment full stop. Is it producing happier children, better behaved children? No. If we look at young people's mental health problems or whatever, skyrocketing. We're producing a generation of children that are tending to be more unhappy and less well integrated or whatever than in the past. And I think this abdication of adult authority, including the application of punishment, has been a significant factor in that. All right. I've had to vote for an independent in the Seaforth ward. Sadly, there's no one running for you here. What I always say for people when they say they're disappointed there's no family party candidate, I say it could be you next time. So all in, if you fancy being our candidate next time, then join the party, and we're going to start planning for the Westminster election very soon. Our ambition is to have a candidate in every seat. There's 59 constituencies. We've got 84 candidates this time. So we've got the people power. What we need, the money is going to be the challenge within the next 2 years. But if we can get that money together, so donors, we would really appreciate a substantial investment in that, then we'll hopefully have a candidate everywhere. Right, hello. That's an interesting image. Right, my mum uses postal voters. She's a nurse and is constantly tired. Anyway, there was no option for her to take an SFP on her choices. She's Glasgow East End. I would say Glasgow was our most disappointing council area in terms of number of candidates. We have meetings in Glasgow. We have quite a lot of people there. But as it turns out, they all live sort of around the outskirts of Glasgow. So we've got quite a few candidates around the edge, but we haven't got many actually within Glasgow City Council area. But next time, we will hope to have far more. Now, a week on Saturday, I'm going to be speaking at an event in Glasgow. Now, it would be helpful if I had the proper details. I think it's not George Square. It might be Buchanan Street. On the steps, is it the steps in front of the Buchanan Gallery? On the topic of sex education. So I understand Glasgow Cabby is going to be there, some of the figures as well. So do come along and hear the shocking truth and show your disgust at the Scottish Government's policies in terms of what they think is appropriate for children. Well, monsters. I mean, monsters has got a wide range of meanings. By monsters, I don't think you mean like, Hitler was a monster. I think you mean like a bit more light-hearted, little monsters who don't do as they're told, quite awkward, difficult to deal with, and often unhappy. It's not the formula for a happy childhood to be able to get your own way with everything and do your own thing. Would you allow children to smack their parents? No, because parents have a proper authority over their children. So parents can impose punishments of various sorts and can impose rules of various sorts or can impose decisions on various matters on their children, but not vice versa. And that's the proper relationship between children and parents. Whereas the Scottish Government, and this is a worldwide phenomenon, the Scottish Government doesn't think of anything on its own. They just follow international trends. But the international trend is to equalize children and adults. It normally goes under the heading of children's rights, but they want to equalize children and adults, which is not good for children and it's not good for adults. What question would you most like to be asked at a hustings? Right, there's a good question. What question do you most like to be asked? At a hustings at the last election, someone said to me, someone asked the question, which of the policies of the other parties do you object to most? Well, that's a great question. You always like that one. I would say in any election, as a pro-life party, I would always like a question, does your party approve of the killing of unborn children? That's always a great question. We can just say no. And usually all the other parties have to say, we agree with that. That's our policy, to have the killing of unborn children continuing. But yeah, thank you very much, Kate. So how is hitting a child going to help with their mental health? Right, it's not the actual hitting. It's not, let's look at punishment in general. It's not actually the punishment directly that helps mental health, in the same way that like putting a child in detention doesn't help with their mental health. Telling them off about something probably doesn't directly help with their mental health. It doesn't do any harm. But more broadly, a child knowing where the boundaries are and having that, to be honest, sense of security and knowing that there are boundaries and that there are adults who are setting those boundaries and effectively taking away some of their freedom so that they can exercise their own freedom within appropriate bounds. That's the safety and security that children need as they're growing up. So hitting a child or other sorts of punishment, other forms of discipline, help their mental health by creating the security of giving clear parameters of behavior within which the child can live their lives. So I hope that helps. Do keep the questions coming. Mr. Enter Name here. I remember my own two threatening to call Childline on me back in the day, little beggars. When I was teaching, I sometimes used to say to boys, jokingly, if they were complaining about something, they thought I'd been a bit unfair about something, or they wanted to do something, I was saying no. I sometimes used to say to them, joking, I'll go for a Childline. I know if it was a laugh, they'd have a laugh. Apparently one boy did go and do it once, but anyway, it's amounted to nothing. Right, David again. What are your views on street begging and drug addicts constantly causing trouble in city centres? Right, let's go with drug addicts for a start. Drug addicts, there's two sides to the coin, I think. On the one hand, if someone's a drug addict, then I think we need to be compassionate and supportive and try and offer them what they need in order to move beyond the mess that they've got into. On the other hand, I do tend to also, and the family party policy also emphasizes personal responsibility. So basically the message to children, young people, should be, don't be stupid. and start taking illegal drugs, because you'll end up messing your life up. And then when you mess your life up, you'll probably be turning around saying, oh, the support services aren't good enough. The council's not doing its job properly. We haven't got all the help that we need. But then before they get in a mess, it's all people who object to drug use. It's, oh, you need to lighten up. You're so judgmental. You're just stigmatizing us. Well, I think drug use should be stigmatized. It should be regarded as something that's really extremely foolish. And anyone who's doing that is making a major mistake in their life. I know people are facing significant difficulties when they enter into drug addiction. Okay, quite understand that. But it still needs to be seen as a really irresponsible and bad decision to go down that road. So I think, the law needs to be enforced very strongly as well on suppliers and users of illegal drugs. So in terms of begging, that's not something we have any policy on. And there's a variety of reasons people beg. Some people beg because it's the best source of income they can get. I mean, it's the highest rate of pay that they can get. So maybe there's the option of working at the car wash down the road or begging on the street. Begging on the street might have a higher hourly rate, so some people choose to do that. So that is the case. Some situations, I think a lot of people, if you're homeless, you've got no money, there's a place at a hostel, there's some sort of benefits available to you. Is begging strictly necessary? I think in a lot of cases, it isn't really. Might there be some cases where that is someone's sole source of income? Well, it's possible. Personally, I think it's good to give people the benefit of the doubt. I mean, sometimes I'll, say to a beggar, if I'm going to get a McDonald's or something, do you want to come and get a McDonald's as well? And they will, and they'll tell you the life story. So I do that quite often, knowing that maybe I'm being conned and this person doesn't really have money, or they're an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever. So street beggars, a wide variety, but I think a lot of cases, then it's just a way of gaining income that isn't strictly necessary, isn't strictly charitable in its nature, shall we say. Anyway, thank you, David. Right, Arlene, I've joined. Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, I remember that meeting. Okay, right, very good. Yeah, when you join the party, excellent. Yeah, anyone else do join the Scottish Family Party? Go to the website and sign up. Loving the show tonight. Okay, welcome, Patriot. Don't think we've seen that name before. Welcome. Glad you're enjoying it. How are we doing for time? 7 o'clock. So the BBC party election broadcast will have finished. So there's quite a few people coming along. I'd be interested if you have come here because you were watching the party election broadcast. Do just say so. I'd be interested to see if my little scheme has attracted anyone to this. Okay. Keep us posted, as it may not be known by many parents that this is happening. Please make it clear about an SNP member saying paedophiles are not monsters. Now, the whole child sexuality thing, I mean, for those of you who are not familiar, I made a video recently. I mean, the man the Scottish government appointed to be in charge of sex education resources is a man who wrote in his PhD dissertation about the need to break down the barrier between childhood and sexuality, break down the artificial barrier that's being created by society between childhood and sexuality. This is Dr. Colin Morrison. I mean, my interpretation of his writings is that he opposes age of consent laws. And I mean, my thing, the natural interpretation of what he's writing is he is an advocate of children having sex. Basically, that seems to be what he's saying to me. But certainly wants to break down the barrier between childhood and sexuality. I mean, what does that mean if it doesn't mean bringing sexuality into childhood? What does that mean if it doesn't mean bringing sexual experience into childhood, sexual exploration, sexual relationships? Well, let's leave it at that. Right. Pauline, smack is not abuse. Absolutely. It's a necessary sign of discipline and authority. Abuse is something different. I mean, absolutely. I mean, if a smack was abuse, that would mean virtually every child brought up until relatively recent decades was abused by their parents. And let's just look at the big picture. How was children's mental health through the, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s compared to now? I mean, now that this alleged abuse has been stopped, how's children's mental health? Has it suddenly improved dramatically? No. The opposite is happening. Children's mental health and all sorts of measures of well-being with children are basically getting worse and worse and worse. So the further we go down this sort of hyper-liberal, progressive parenting authority route, undermine adult authority with children, the worse things get for children. But of course, if you're an ideologue, the results don't matter. Even if things are getting worse, that just means you haven't gone far enough in the direction you're going in. You just need to go even further. And if you keep going for long enough, eventually it will become better. It's like the quack selling medicine that doesn't work, basically. Is you give it to the person and you say, this will make you better. But sometimes the way it makes you better is it makes you get worse first. And then you take it. And if you get better, you think, great, it works. If you get worse, you think, oh, great, it's working. So it doesn't matter what happens. You think it's working. But it's not really falsifiable, as the philosopher of science, Karl Popper, would have said. What would you do to stop the implication of New World Order? By New World Order, I think you probably mean a movement of internationalism, of world government. Now, there are people, certainly, who want world government. Very definitely. There are academics and campaigners who want to bring about a world government. How's that going in practice? Probably the closest we've got to that sort of internationalist movement is probably the EU, which is seeking to integrate countries to a very significant extent. So the EU is an expression of that type of thinking. I mean, beyond that, how's the project going? I suggest not very well at the moment. Look around the world. I mean, we do not see the great nations of the world moving together towards a world government. So I think there is that vision in some people, and it's not a vision that I share. I don't think that world government is a good objective. But on the other hand, I really don't see progress towards it at all. I see progress away from it, if anything. So I hope that's what you meant. If that's not quite what you meant, do clarify, Angela. Right there, Derek. We had to tell the school to keep our son behind to catch up with work, and they told us they will, but they can't suggest this to parents. What would be the first thing you change about the school system? All right, let me read that again. We had to tell the school to keep our son behind to catch up with work. They told us that they will, but they can't suggest this to parents. All right, okay. So if another pupil in the school is falling behind, the school feels they can't say to the parents, we need him to stay behind to catch up, because that would probably be undermining his children's rights or who knows what else. But that just illustrates the way that schools are having to tiptoe around and kowtow to the views of children. Now, when I was teaching, when I was a housemaster in particular, I would often have conversations with boys. It was a boys' school. It wasn't just I was ignoring the girls. It was a boys' school. I would have conversations. What do you think about this? Are you enjoying this? Is there anything we could do better? What sort of things would you like to change? Are there anything spoiling your experience of school at the moment? We'd have those sort of conversations. That's absolutely great. You listen to the young people. But that was within the context of clear sort of authority as well. They knew that they would make suggestions. I would consider them, might or might not implement them as I saw fit. Whereas now children are more taught that you've got the right to be listened to, which also starts to sound like you've got the right to have what you want as well. So, right, let's go back to time machine to Aurelius. Living in an ordered society benefits mental health. Absolutely. Reasonable chastisement of young children is part of an ordered society. Ordered society benefits mental health. That's a great way of putting it. People of a very progressive persuasion, they tend to believe that humans are inherently good. So if we just create the right system, we won't need any discipline or punishment or rules or anything like that. People will just get along in peace and harmony. But it's not true. That's not what human nature's like. I mean, I know from what goes on in my head that's not what it's like. Human nature involves an urge towards selfishness and seeing what you can get away with and sort of exploiting other people for your own benefit, etc. So that's why these rules are necessary. But the progressive ideology that drives the SNP and the other parties as well too, to some extent, says that these things are not necessary just because people are inherently nice. If we're nice enough to them, then the niceness will flood around and it'll all be fine. Which there's some truth in that, but it's not the whole truth. And they act as if it is. 100%. Right, yes, thank you. Right, hello, Rich. Is the family party a Christian party? No, we're not a Christian party. We're a secular party. Now, what I mean by that is that we don't have any specifically religious foundation or specifically religious justification for any policies. And our policies do not involve anything like, make Christianity the state religion or bring back singing hymns in schools or anything like that. But our policies, a lot of them do reflect, I'm a Christian myself, a lot of them do reflect Orthodox traditional Christian teaching. And they also reflect Orthodox traditional teaching of Islam and many other world religions as well, and lots of other people of no religion who are socially conservative. So we're not a Christian party. Are most of our members Christians? I would say yes, they are, but by no means all. We've got all sorts of other people as well. I think our Northeast chairman is a Buddhist, a sort of Eastern religious persuasion, a lot of interest from Muslims as well. So yeah, hope that helps. If you'd like to read my book, Christians in Politics, I talk about the interaction of party politics and Christian faith in a little bit of depth. Here it is. So Richard, if you wanted to go over to Amazon, you could order yourself one of those, Christians in Politics, Unmuffling the Prophetic Voice by Richard Lucas. And well, tell me what you think of it. Right, thanks, Rich. Right, sorry, the lights. I'm having to move further and further over to see out of the light here. I need to get some tape over that. Right, Derek, what would be the first thing you'd change about the school system? That's a really tough question. I mean, where do you start? Where do you start? Spoiled for choice. I mean, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is just the sheer political indoctrination as well into a sort of left-wing, liberal, progressive, secular sort of view. So the LGBT, feminist, climate change, equality, inclusion, diversity sort of agenda. I'm not saying that sort of everything about those things is bad, but a lot of the ideas related to them are politically contentious, but they're preached to pupils in school as fact. So maybe one of the first things I would change as I would cut out the political indoctrination, which would be very difficult because we've got an awful lot of teachers who think that's normal. They don't realize they're doing it. They just think they're teaching the one true truth. They're not even aware that what they're saying is politically controversial. So maybe that would be a good place to start. The broadcast was brilliant. Indeed it was. I can say that because I wasn't in it. It was made by a gentleman called Gary Downey, who is a family party member. He's one of our candidates over in Fife. And he's a bit of a movie maker, as you can see. I think he filmed it himself, like set up his tripod and then just appeared on the film. But it is fantastic, isn't it? It's absolutely brilliant. The party election broadcast we made for the election last year, again, was with a party member. Actually, my wife went and filmed it with my phone, and we edited it together. And people were saying, where'd you get all your money from? How do you afford to hire an actress and a film crew like that? So I don't know if people will be saying the same. But anyway, Audrey, thank you very much for that comment. Nice. Yes, I saw that one. Yeah. Yeah, so we're talking about sort of homeless people, beggars, never money. Okay, yep, that's a fair policy, I think. Children are dependent on parents, can be smacked for bad behavior. Politicians are dependent on taxpayers. So why can't we give them a smack on the hand when they misbehave? Now, that's a very good point. We'll consider that for our policies in the future. I think that could be a vote winner. That's for sure. Yeah. What about the 70 million missing again? More money given to her nippy by Westminster. Please. Right. I'm not familiar with that story. I know about the 600,000 whatever from the independence campaign that basically they spent on other things. Yeah, I'm not. That one's not springing to mind. Remind me of what that one was about. Yeah, sex education programs in Scotland. The government's resources are utterly atrocious, absolutely appalling, to the point where we tell people about them, we show people images from them, and often people won't believe it. They just will not believe it. They assume we're just some sort of nutters making stuff up. If we were making it up, the government would have sued us long ago. Anyway, but it is part of a global movement. As I say, the SNP doesn't think up anything on its own. the SNP is never happier than when it's been told what to do from a supernatural body, like the EU or particularly the UN. Are the other parties in the Scottish Parliament any different? No. In that regard, no. Right, let's have a look. Yeah, like and share, that would be good. Particularly our party election broadcast. Do like and give that a share as well on social media. Right. Hello, Mr. Incognito. What is your party's position on the SNP's New Scots scheme? In the past decade, my city has experienced clear ethnic demographic replacement migration. In parts of my city, English is no longer spoken. Right. Okay. Let's go through that. Demographic replacement. I mean, first of all, do hear me out on this, but first of all, I would question that. People haven't been replaced. The fact that immigrants have come in doesn't mean they've replaced people who are already there. So I'd be cautious of the term replacement, but there might have been a high level of incoming immigration. In parts of my city, English is no longer spoken. Well, I think that is not good at all. Scottish Family Party policy includes an emphasis on English lessons, free English lessons for immigrants, and I think that should be vital. So rather than spending the money on translating every council document into 20 languages, I think the emphasis should be on people needing to learn English in order to be part of our society. I don't mean our society in contrast to their society. I mean our shared society, and I want everyone to be able to enter fully into that. And in order to do that, one needs to learn English. I think of people that are not wanting to learn English, basically that's a problem. That's a problem. I think the attitude of those people isn't all that it might be, because integration in the longer term is the ideal. I mean, just to talk about that a little bit, I talked about this on the live stream, a different aspect of immigration. What tends to happen with immigration? Let's say you've got some little town in Scotland and an Indian couple move into it and open an Indian restaurant, and they're the first Indian people in the whole town. So people get an Indian restaurant. The people speak English all the time because there's no one to speak any other language to. The kids get to know the local kids, and everyone enjoys the restaurant. And it's just fantastic. It's enriched the community by bringing in that diversity, one could say. But those couple who came, they knew that they were coming to an alien culture, and they were going to have to make a real effort to fit in, to integrate, and to learn the language. And so that's what they did. But then a couple of people who are their relatives might think, oh, we'll go as well, because it's a bit easier for us. Okay, well, we'll have to learn the language a bit, but we'll have some people to speak to in our own language as well. So let's say another couple of families come along, but then the children start playing with their children instead and start speaking the home language instead. The adults as well, whereas maybe the original couple were mixing more, then they'll tend maybe more to stay within the newcomers that have come over from their home country. So you see, if that process goes on, the bigger that immigrant community becomes, then the easier it becomes for other immigrants to move into it, because the cultural barrier, well, they might think it's non-existent. They might think there's a parallel society to move into where you don't even need to learn English, because you're going to be surrounded by people from your home culture, and you can live your whole life in that context. Now, I think that's not the ideal with immigration. I think immigration should try to avoid that situation, because integration is a very long process. It's a multi-generational process. So that the rate of immigration needs to be moderated in the light of the length of that integration process. And from what you were describing in your town, that hasn't been happening. All right, this is a candidate in Renfrewshire. If you look on our Facebook page, I'll go this now. If you look on our Facebook page at the pinned post, there's a list of all the wards where we have a candidate, and you can have a look there. Right. Retrain teachers leave their personal politics at home. Yeah, it's partly retraining teachers. It's partly, but it's government policy. Sheer indoctrination is government policy. I mean, the Conservative Party, again, cutting and pasting from the SNP manifesto, seems to be just beginning to wake up to the fact that the SNP has turned Scottish schools into Green Party activist training camps. And the slight problem with that they're finding is that they are actually producing Green Party voters. So it's sort of backfiring on the SNP a little bit. They've done everything they can to tell them that these sort of politically correct, progressive issues are at the center of politics. Then the pupils take it on board and end up voting green. So maybe the SNP is, reaping what it sowed, let's put it that way. Then Margaret, the broadcast is so clear and concise, be prepared to give an answer with gentleness and respect. Indeed, I know where that quote comes from. I'm glad you enjoyed the broadcast. I think Gary did very well. Right, this is a reply to someone else. Very recently, I've seen as many houses be snapped up in 3 local areas that I have personal connections with, 8 including the area where I was born and raised. It's now unrecognizable. Right, I think you're talking about immigration. Again, sorry, it didn't mean to put that on. I think if an area changes dramatically in terms of its culture, I think it's perfectly reasonable and justified for some people to say, I actually don't like this change. That this isn't something I regard as positive, which, again, I mean, how these things are balanced is very difficult. But I just think overall immigration policy needs to strike the right balance between these reasonable concerns of local people and the need for integration, with also the factors where immigration can be positive. I mean, some types of immigration in some situations are positive economically, and there are other reasons for immigration as well. So, yeah. Right, hello. In schools, develop children's skills in critical thinking. That is Scottish Family Party policy. We say scrap all of the political indoctrination and have critical thinking lessons instead. And these critical thinking lessons should involve no reference whatsoever to any political issues. Because if they do, they just won't be able to resist turning it into an indoctrination session. Because what they do, they say, right, this is a critical thinking lesson. Point out the flaw in Donald Trump's argument. Explain the strengths of Joe Biden's statement. That's what it would become. They would just skew. But when I say they, I'm talking about the government, the resource producers, and a lot of cases, not all cases, and a lot of cases, the teachers would use it as a vehicle again for political indoctrination. So in order to avoid that, you have critical thinking lessons that make no reference at all to contemporary political issues. I would think that is real education, teaching them how to think, then they can come across the real issues and assess them with their own skills, with their own mind, make up their own mind. Right, so yeah, excellent point. That's in our manifesto. Right, Leon, welcome. Richard, why would you breach a young person's privacy by telling teachers to tell parents if young people change gender? Surely it should be up to the young people when they want to come out. Right, okay, well, that's unusually, that is a dissenting question on this topic that's phrased very moderately and sensibly. So I'm delighted to reply to that. If you think about a young person, let's take an extreme example just to strengthen my case, if you like. I think when I say a 5-year-old, a boy who's decided he's really a girl, and the school starts treating that boy as a girl, so he's being referred to by a girl's name. He's wearing girls' clothes at school. All the other pupils are referring to him as a girl, but that's being kept secret from the parents. As far as I'm concerned, that is totally unacceptable, because that is a life factor, a life situation, a life decision that is of the utmost gravity for that child, and for the parents to be excluded for that, I think, is the height of irresponsibility, because the parents are the ones who love that child the most, are in the best position to help care for that child and guide that child. And also, what tends to happen in schools is, in the instance of transgender pupils, they're given bad advice in school. The schools damage young people by giving them the wrong advice. Because when a 5-year-old boy says, I think I'm a girl, the school says, oh, great, well done. That's really brave of you. You are a girl. It's really wonderful that you've realized that. What do you want us to call you? What do you want to wear? As far as we're concerned, you're a girl. Now, I think that's really damaging and dangerous advice and a response to that young person. A much better response is what the parents might well do. They might say, whoa, now you're not really, that's not really true. Well, let's talk about this. What's making you think that? That's probably not the best road to go down. Why don't we just wait and see what's going on here? That, I think, is a much better approach. and also reflects the fact that most young people do grow out of gender confusion through their teenage years in any case. So partly it's driving a wedge between parents and the children. So it's the school taking a conspiratorial approach. You know, we're the ones who really care for you. We'll keep those parents out of it, shall we? That's just completely wrong. Then you've got the school giving dangerous and harmful advice that's going to damage young people. And the parents are not given the opportunity to have their input to it. Now, Leon, I suspect you're going to disagree with that, but do come back. I'll be happy to respond again. I drew my 4 kids last year, so I saw how bad the school system was up close over the past 2 years. And I'm just hearing so many stories of people taking their children out of school and home educating instead. The Scottish Family Party has policies that are very supportive of home educators in terms of making resources and basically making whatever aspects of the education system the parents want to avail themselves of available to them. I won't go into details, but yeah, we're very supportive of home educators. I think that in the medium term, we can expect to see the screw being turned on home education in Scotland. The countries that the SNP admires tend to be countries that don't allow home education. So let's see how this develops in the future. But my prediction is that the Scottish government will start making it more difficult for home educators, particularly home educators who don't share the government's philosophy in various areas. Every single impoverished area of Glasgow alone has completely transformed, with services unable to support people's needs, with health first and foremost, but community centres unopened and mounting problems. Yeah, I know in Glasgow there's some, I mean, things are pretty dire in a lot of wards on there. I wouldn't like to suggest that these problems are straightforward to solve, but they certainly exist. And the first step towards solving problems is to acknowledge them. And I think that tends not to happen, particularly in Glasgow, because they wanted to put a brave face on it. Look, we're doing a great job. Things are not too bad, really. Whereas I think people in Glasgow realise that that is not the case. So I just lost my vote. I'm not sure how I lost that. You could tell me that. Implementation of a cashless society, digital currency, green agenda, crops being destroyed, class swap and agenda 2130. You'll be happy and own nothing. Right. Okay. I'm aware of those ideas that are floating around. I'm not sure what I said to lose your vote, so maybe you could enlighten me on that. Right. We'll finish quite soon. Let's have a few more. Teaching my kids how to research the things they're hearing and seeing and not take things at face value without digging a bit deeper. Yeah, I think that's a good approach. Teachers are very influential, particularly with younger children, though. And there's a real risk that instead of coming home and saying, this is what we were taught today, is that true? That maybe in a lot of cases they won't do that and they will just take on board some wonky views from school. Right. Yeah, absolutely. The sex education leaders from the UN, the World Health Organization, I mean, they promote appalling, immoral sex education the world over. Yeah. Now, of course, now when you say that, what's the solution to it? The solution to it is to work with the Scottish Family Party, get us in the Scottish Parliament, because the Scottish government could reject it. The United Nations cannot force the Scottish government to implement, well, virtually anything. Okay, they can kick up a fuss and moan and complain or whatever, but the Scottish government could say, thanks for your advice, we reject it, we don't think that's the right thing to do, we're doing this instead. Okay? And that's what governments need to do with regard to the United Nations. On some issues, not on other issues, the United Nations is a force for good, but in many ways it's being captured by progressive activists who use it as a medium to impose their ideology on the whole world. Right, Derek, now this is an interesting issue. Our school had a permission slip asking if they could attend lessons with a massage therapist where the kids had to rub each other and say how they're feeling. This was P2. Creepy nonsense. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I talked about this in a live stream with Phil Tanzer, but because there's organizations in Scotland who go into schools to lead these sort of class massage sessions. I don't think it's right, because this is like, mixed sex as well. I think it's breaking down a barrier that actually should be there. So if you've got a class where the boys massage the girls massage the boys, and that's just seen as a perfectly normal thing to do, as they're getting a bit older, some of the boys might fancy some of the girls, some of the girls might fancy some of the boys. It's massage lesson time. What are they going to be thinking? Oh, I hope I get a massage from so and so. Oh, and it's broken down an inhibition that perhaps might have been protective in terms of delaying onset of sexual activity, shall we say? So yeah, but in Scottish education, the sort of sentimental, feel-good sort of thing that tends to be what drives things. But I share your concerns entirely. Right. Trans movement is easy to explain. First, they demoralized Indigenous British children with critical race theory, resulting in the child being ashamed of their own identity, culture, heritage, race, history, etc. By critical race theory, those of you who are not aware, it's the idea that basically racial groups share group responsibility for the actions of their race. And it always works out that basically white people are the baddies, and society now needs to be rebalanced. So white people need to be pushed down a bit, and other people of other races need to be lifted up a bit. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It just creates injustice to individuals, but that's the basic idea. But that teaching is government policy. I saw a letter that a lady in Aberdeen had written to a school. I think it was a Polish lady, actually. She'd written to the school saying, my child's been taught critical race theory at school. What is going on? I don't want them teaching this. And the reply from the Scottish government was basically, well, that's what we're going to teach. That's our policy. Now, in America, there have been huge political ructions about this issue, huge. It's been an election deciding issue in some states. Because what happened was that during the lockdown, parents actually started seeing what rubbish the kids were being taught at school, and they were up in arms. In Scotland, parents are beginning to become aware of that, but maybe there's a bit more apathy or a slightly different mindset in Scotland, but hopefully we will stir up a similar reaction over time. We're getting there. It's starting to come. Right, I'm just going to find one or two more questions, and it's time to go. The questions are flooding in. I'm tempted to keep going. I'll just have a drink of my tea. My throat's getting a bit dry. Right, let's have a look. Agree with you, the critical thinking should be introduced in schools, especially the no true Scotsman fallacy. Yeah, it's one of the many fallacies that people need to be taught about. I think the other thing with teaching critical thinking, if you've got an awareness of logical fallacies, you're just armed. And when you listen to someone speaking, you can just recognize them one after another. And you realize that, to be honest, when you hear a lot of stuff in the media, you hear politicians speaking, you realize it basically is a string of fallacies. Now, maybe they think that's what actually convinces people best. But if the population were better educated in this area, maybe that wouldn't work anymore. Right. Should any seats be won by the Scottish Family Party in May? Are there any parties you'll be prepared to work with? Are there any minor parties that we work with or friendly with? Friendly, yeah. We don't have an alliance with anyone. We don't particularly overlap with policies hugely with anyone either. I mean, the Scottish Christian Party barely exists, to be honest. I mean, it was quite a force quite a few years ago, over 10 years ago. I say it barely exists. Now, UKIP also, I mean, it does exist, but it's very, very small. If you look at our emphasis, pro-family, pro-marriage, pro-life, I mean, which other party are we overlapping with? I mean, there isn't one. really. In terms of going into a coalition, I haven't really considered that. I mean, I can imagine all the Holyrood parties would go all high-handed and say, "Oh, we could never join the evil Scottish Family Party in a coalition. Our principles are too firm." Well, maybe we just say we couldn't go into an alliance with parties that kill unborn children as well. But we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Right, I'll maybe just take one more and we'll call it a day. Seems ironic to me, more interested in LGBTQI than actual local issues. Would your party introduce free garden waste collections? Yes. Garden waste collections, in one way, it's a sort of tax on families. Who needs a garden the most? I mean, family homes particularly have gardens. If you're, a single person or a couple with no kids or whatever, you might well live in a flat, spend your money on going on a cruise or whatever. So I think a tax on gardens is not appropriate. In terms of local issues, I don't know when you tuned in. Gina, is that right? That was my best shot at your name. I don't know when you tuned in, but I talked about some local issues early on. I mean, basically, when it comes to fixing the roads and sorting the bins out, is anyone going to vote for the Scottish Family Party because we think we're the party to get the bin collections sorted or to get the roads sorted? Well, maybe we've got policy in these areas. I would hope our candidates would be efficient and challenging and effective councillors, and they would make a difference in those areas. But it might be quite hard to convince people that we're distinctive and we would actually do these things better, whereas the other parties would say they're trying to do the same things as well. But in the other areas, we have got something very distinctive to say. So what we're saying is, let's say, to talk personally, just to make it easier to explain, if I was elected as a councillor in Collinston and Fairmile Head, I would devote time to serving the local community, listening to what they've got to say, getting involved in local politics in Edinburgh, trying to sort out problems and push things in the right direction, including very definitely the mundane things, the bin collections, the holes in the roads, the bridges getting fixed, the cycle lanes, all that sort of thing. Because that's the job of being a councillor, and they're important things. But what we're bringing as a family party is also a unique set of values that we think are very much needed in Scottish politics. And the main area where they apply at a local level is in education, which is why we're focusing on education as in our local agenda. Right. Okay, if you have a look at the post pinned to the top of our Facebook page, you can see a list of all our candidates. If you want to contact them, if you email chairman at scottishfamily.org, then he will put you in touch with a local representative and you can find out about candidates. Right, so I think we will leave it there. Thanks very much for tuning in. I've enjoyed interacting with all these comments and questions. That's been great. Maybe I should do this more often. So I'm glad you enjoyed the party election broadcast. If you haven't seen it yet, do go to our YouTube or Facebook. Facebook is pinned to the top of the page. Have a watch and do share it as widely as you can. So thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your evening. And vote Scottish Family Party on the 5th of May. Right, good night.